pretty amped in here.
Yeah, this is an amazing audience.
Wow.
Are you kidding me?
Cool.
You guys are amazing. Can I just say, I mean, I've known you for a few years, but it's always weird speaking to you post-Westworld, because there are moments when I'm not sure if you are you. And I'm sure you get this from many people. You are so good playing that role. Has that just become something that you accept now? Is people waiting to see if you twitch?
I do glitch from time to time. I give myself away. I actually, as well, have a little bit of metal in this knee now, so I think that's kind of an upgrade on my former
yeah,
self.
because you had like a knee surgery,
I had some
right?
knee surgery about a month ago, yeah, to fix an old ACL injury, but it's all good. It's all good.
That's where you went away. Okay. Yeah, we've seen the show. They take you away, they repair you, and then you come back. We get it.
Exactly.
We get it. But you're here for a very different reason, and I guess on a timely date. You know, in the United States, people are remembering veterans who fought in World War I, and your documentary, We're Not Done Yet, is in a big part about people who have survived fighting in a war, you know, veterans who suffer PTSD. It's a powerful story, and what you do is you connect all of them to us and to each other using theater and poems. How did you even start this process?
It's a good question. Over time, I guess I kind of grew up and became a little more aware and a little more appreciative of the men and women who serve. I think one of the mistakes that was made after Vietnam was that some of us conflated the politics of that war with the people who answered the call. And I think that would be a huge mistake right now. So I just, my respect, based on relationships that I developed with people who were veterans, based on an experience in Sierra Leone, going over there in 2001 during the war, a ceasefire at the time, but the first war zone that I had ever experienced.
Right.
And it changes your thinking. Those things that you once took for granted, like security, you no longer take for granted. You don't take for granted that when the order falls away, somebody has to work to restore it. So there were a number of experiences over time that increased my respect. And I was doing a group of readings called Theater of War. There's a guy named Brian Dories who uses the Greek tragedies as a platform for conversation about the consequences of war, and he does it in military communities. He even does it in inner city communities around gun violence. He, for example, argues that Ajax story, that's an examination of what we might contemporarily call PTSD. And so I was doing those, and I went down to DC for one of these readings, and there happened to be some people from the Pentagon there. And I asked, hey, is there any way I can get more closely involved? And in fact, a couple of weeks before that, I had been out in Colorado at an airport, rural airport, with my kids coming home from vacation skiing. And there was a guy sitting in a wheelchair, all the decorations there, and he was a triple amputee. And he recognized me, and I went over and I said hello, and we talked. And he talked about the people from my line of work who had visited him at Walter Reed. He had been hit by a mortar shell in Afghanistan, and it just like rocked me. I was like, oh man, what am I doing with my time that I can't at least go down and see if I can be useful too? So when I did this reading in DC, met these folks from the Pentagon, I said, hey, what can I do? They called me back. Somehow I passed the vetting process for the Pentagon, and they introduced me to a woman named Seema Reza, who runs a writing workshop with veterans who are working through their trauma through poetry. And one of them had the idea to put on a staged reading of collective poems that they had written, and I was asked would I come down and direct them. So, well, I never served, but, I know something about the theater, so I came down, and it was a life-changing experience working with them.
It's interesting that you say there are certain things we take for granted, such as security. A lot of America's military and a lot of the troops have been politicized because of who is in power and when and how. One thing that is apparent is that America seems to discard many of its troops when these people come home. You see so many people that are, that are lauded and applauded when they're out fighting, but when people come home, they struggle to find jobs, they struggle to find their place in society, and time again, we see these conversations where people are saying, is America doing enough for the troops who are no longer active? Is it as important? What did you find when you spoke to the human beings behind the uniforms?
The answer to that question is no. And I think one of the things that I'm proud about this film is that it gives voice to those men and women who know best, those men and women who put themselves on the line. And these are veterans who experience PTSD from combat, but also sexual assault related to their military experience.
Right.
But we don't hear from them. And we hear from the politicians and the blowhards who actually use these men and women to divide us. So we have a conversation about police brutality, and all of a sudden the troops are brought into that conversation. Conversation about immigration, all of a sudden we're deploying troops down there who are going to sit and do what? Fire on women and children? Can you imagine the optics of something like that? Can you imagine the act itself?
Right.
So, but we hear the troops manipulated and the vets manipulated for political agendas, but we don't hear from them. And those very issues that are used as political tools are not addressed. So you still have 20 vets per day dying from suicide. We heard a lot about that during the campaign, not so much anymore, but the rates are still the same.
Right. It's a powerful program that you put together. And what's great